Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, that time already? Whoa. Basketball.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always with my co-hosts, Connor Hope and Riley Davis. Guys, we're getting close to March. And with that in mind, we're a couple weeks away from Selection Sunday. We are a few days away from the start of conference tournaments. We're here. We're going to look at some bracketology in this episode of the Heat Check Hangout. Go look at some top seeds, look at the top 16 bracket reveal, some of the teams that were in the mix there, evaluate who's still in line for those top seeds, who could potentially take one, who's a legitimate championship contender, and then take a look at the bubble as well, because this time of year that might be more important than the top seeds, because you got to get in the dance to do anything in the dance. And there are a couple of teams that are really sweating things out. And I will not mention a certain team in Chapel Hill that is really sweating it out for the sake of Riley. But we're just about there. So the top seeds for the top 16 reveal that happened about a week ago, Alabama, Houston, Purdue, and Kansas. Alabama, at the time of the top 16 reveal, was number one overall seed, no real doubt. Then the entire Brandon Miller situation came about, and I don't want to harp on that because at this point it's very much a he said, she said, and we don't know everything the DA knows, and we don't have the security footage of what was going on and all that, so we're just not going to touch that. You come here for college basketball, so we're going to talk about the actual on-court product. Bama, Houston, Purdue, and Kansas. General consensus, still on the one line, Connor. Do you see it that way or holding up that way, or is there somebody else who can slide in and potentially take one of those top seeds away from one of those four?
I mean, I feel like the only team that can drop off the one line is Houston. And that's just because, I mean, if they collapse, it's against really bad competition, or not necessarily really bad competition, but bad competition compared to the other three. And they just don't have the wins to support that, right? You're looking at Houston down the stretch having East Carolina, Wichita State, Memphis. If they lose that Memphis game, they're probably still a one seed. If they lose one of the other two, who knows? If they lose two of those games, I think that's where you start to talk about them dropping off that line. But Kansas has an enormous lead in terms of the most quadrant one wins in the country. They have West Virginia, Texas Tech at home, and then Texas on the road to end the season. They could lose those three games and probably still be a one seed. I'm surprised Kansas was the fourth one over Purdue, or behind Purdue, to be honest, just because I think Kansas's resume is that strong, and Purdue and Kansas are 5-6 in the net. So they're really close. Alabama, you talk about the situation they're in, but when you're looking at their resume, that doesn't factor in, right? And they have, again, Arkansas, Auburn, Texas A&M down the stretch. Like, those are games that even if they lose one of the two home games, they can probably survive that. They could probably survive losing two, as long as, a home. Maybe they lose to Arkansas or Auburn in that rivalry game, and then they lose at Texas A&M. Like, I could see them still being a one seed based off of that, especially if they make the run that we think they're going to make in the SEC tournament. And then Purdue, again, right? They're Indiana and Illinois at home, both relatively solid teams net-wise. Wisconsin on the road. We can talk about Wisconsin later when we talk about bubble teams, but Wisconsin's still a borderline tournament team based on their resume. And so losing on the road to them wouldn't be a killer. Houston's the only one I can see sliding off that one line if they lose, and I don't see them losing. So I think the one seeds are relatively safe, but they can obviously switch.
Same to you, Riley, yeah. or is there somebody else in danger?
It's tough to say who's in danger. I think in some ways with Purdue, I mean, with how favorably, with how well they fare in the advanced metrics, and again, I think they have 9 Q1 wins. It's pretty tough to envision them sliding off that one line. I would say I'm a little bit intrigued with Arizona or UCLA. If either of them can win out, would that be enough to maybe bump Purdue? If, let's say, Purdue, but then again, their schedule stacks up pretty favorably well. They're 2 tough games, Illinois and Indiana. For one, Illinois might not be that good. At the time of recording, Illinois was kind of getting boat raced by Northwestern at home, and Indiana's got to go to West Lafayette, and I just don't think this Indiana team is good enough to sweep Purdue. So it's tough to envision Purdue dropping any of their 3 remaining games. They got to go at Wisconsin, and I mean, maybe there's a very slight chance that just going on the road they could drop that one, but I don't think this Wisconsin team's very good. So yeah, I'm curious to see if either UCLA or Arizona can win their last 3 or 4 games. I think they both have 3 games left, and maybe make things a little interesting. But it's tough to see. They're going to need some help if they want to get a 1 seed.
The counter to that
both
for me with Purdue, sorry Connor, the counter to that is that Purdue is not playing well.
Yeah, right. That's
right, and that's the thing. Like, they have those games at home, which would be a huge boost, but it wouldn't surprise me if they lost 1 or 2, and then maybe don't go as far in the Big Ten tournament as you'd expect. I'm with you, Connor, in that, like, if Houston loses, then it becomes like, do they fall off the 1 line? That's a serious conversation. But I think there's a better chance of Purdue losing than Houston losing, and maybe Purdue losing twice.
I still think it would be kind of a surprise, even though I know because they found ways to win ugly games, like that one against, what was the game against Maryland where they snuck it out with like a 6-point win or something.
The difference with Purdue recently,
they
the
lost
last 3 weeks, has been the guard play. And this is something that we've talked about, and Connor in particular has harped on, where you have 2 freshmen back there. And, they played really well for a good majority of the season, but, like, it's crunch time when you have 2 freshmen who were not blue chip, are not, like, one-and-done NBA prospect kind of guys. They project to be very good college players, guys that will annoy the rest of the Big Ten for the next 3 years, but not that caliber of talent. And would they be able to hold up in these situations? And we're not in March yet, but it seems like Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer have hit a freshman wall. They've struggled the last 5 games, and as a result, Purdue has struggled. And if they turn things around, then Purdue is the team we thought they were, 4 weeks ago. But I'm not sold on that necessarily being the case.
So you mentioned Arizona and UCLA. First of all, I think Arizona is probably more likely to make that jump because they have the road game against UCLA. If they were to go undefeated, it would be a road win over UCLA, plus a road game against USC, where UCLA has Colorado. I think they play Utah tonight, Colorado this weekend, and then Arizona State and Arizona. Not as and at home, not as impressive as what Arizona would go through. But let me pose this question to you: the 5th team on that list was Texas. They have road games against Baylor and TCU, a home game against Kansas, and we assume Kansas can survive a loss.
Yes.
If Texas goes undefeated down the stretch and then meets Kansas in the Big 12 championship, could they jump regardless? Just jump Purdue or jump Houston? Because that would be 2 top 25 road wins.
Yeah.
It would be a home win against a 1 seed, and they would basically have no other losses and then play that same 1 seed in the championship, win or lose. Does Texas jump into the top 4 seeds? They're the only team, I think, that have a legitimate chance to make that leap regardless of the other team's results. If we assume that Alabama stays at the 1, Kansas continues to win, they drop that game against Texas, and then Purdue and Houston just do what we're expecting them to do, or Purdue drops the game. I think Texas could make that leap because again, the Big 12 is the best conference in basketball. They're playing Baylor and TCU, which I don't know what they are in the net, but I'm assuming that they're going to be quadrant 1A wins, or at least, yeah. So that's where I think I am right now, is that Texas is the one that I'm looking. Yeah, Baylor's 12, TCU is 24. So they'd both be quadrant 1 wins. Well, they're on the road, so it doesn't matter. But they're both top 25 in the net. So Texas, I think, is in a really good spot where they theoretically control their own destiny to get a 1 seed. If you assume that Purdue drops a game, whether it be early in the Big Ten tournament or against one of those last 3 teams that they play, because again, we all know the last day of the season, that Sunday, doesn't matter. So
Well, I was going to say, I think. No, finish, Connor.
You think what? Purdue just needs to last till Sunday. They could lose that last game of the Big 12, the Big Ten tournament.
It won't matter.
I think that if Texas wins these last 3 games, like, honestly, I didn't even entertain it because I'm like, there's no way they'll win at both Baylor and TCU, but maybe they do. If they win these last 3 games, I don't care if they lose in the first round of the Big 12 tournament. I would say give them a 1 seed. That resume would be ridiculous. And I think part of that is because, like you said, Connor, you're saying that that Sunday doesn't matter. I'll take it one step further and say conference tournaments don't really seem to matter that much to the committee. And I think it's out of laziness, and it's annoying because I think they should matter. But yeah, that's why I'm always like, if you're going to be locked, if they win those last 3 games, the committee's going to lock them into a 1 seed, and they're not going to want to go back and change their mind regardless of what happens in the tournament.
I think they matter, but not to the extent that we would like for them to, for better or for worse.
They play a tiebreaker role in terms of teams on the bubble. Points to Texas A&M last year. They went on a tremendous run, right, to end the season. But they weren't a bubble team before that run. And I think that's where people get that mistake, is that they looked at Texas A&M, oh, they're a bubble team, man. They went on this run through the SEC. They should be in the tournament. But it's like, no. Yeah. It's basically where they were where Texas Tech is now, which is way off. They played impressively down the stretch. Texas Tech, if the season were to end today, is not a tournament team. I don't think they're a tournament team even if they win out. But if the season were to end today, they're not a tournament team. I mean, I guess if they win out, they'd be the auto bid.
They would be.
But
They would be, yeah.
So, but also, like, I would look at Virginia Tech's an interesting case from last year that wins the ACC on that Saturday, and I think they were an 11 seed. Yeah, they were an 11 seed, and that was going into the ACC tournament. They were 28th on KenPom. I don't have the net numbers, but they beat UNC, who was 25th in KenPom at the time. Probably similarly in the net. They beat them by, I think, 13. I can't do math in my head. Then they beat Duke by 15 the next night to win the championship. Like, they had 2 double-digit wins against that on neutral courts that should have been like Q1A wins, and they were already kind of on the right side of the bubble going into the ACC tournament, and they were still an 11 seed. So that's where I'm like, what does the committee view? How does the committee view these conference tournament games even before that Sunday?
Well,
Virginia Tech, they don't. Oh, go
wasn't
ahead,
Virginia
Brian.
Tech like a 7 seed in the ACC last year, or an 8? Like, it's the same deal with the Hokies this year, where their metrics are really good. The record and results are not. Mm-hmm. And I think the committee obviously takes it into consideration, where it's like, yeah, you're like, West Virginia is a perfect example. Like, West Virginia, you're top 20 in net. You've won 3 Big 12 games. Or, like, might be a couple weeks ago, but, it's great. You're in the mix because of your metrics, but you also haven't won. We're not going to reward you for close losses.
Right. Virginia Tech went on a stretch from the end of November to the end of January where they went 5-10 and started ACC play 2-7. They finished 11-9 in the ACC, but November and December matter, and you can't go 5-10 and expect to be a high seed unless you are going 5-10 down the stretch in the Big 12 and have the previous record and resume to make up for it.
Yeah, I think moving forward, if Texas wins out, you have to put them on the 1 line, and I think that knocks out Purdue, unless Purdue wins out and wins the Big Ten tournament. I think UCLA and Arizona, the Pac-12 champion of those two, is sitting there kind of in a 6th spot to see if Houston and Purdue fall off, or if something happens. And I think Bama and Kansas are 1-seed locks at this point. If something happens with Houston or Purdue, Texas, I think, is sitting there at 5. UCLA, Arizona winners sitting there at 6, unless Texas loses all 3 of these games, which I don't foresee. I don't foresee them winning all 3 either, but I don't foresee them losing all of them. That'll be interesting to watch. The group after that, though, Riley, is where I think things get interesting, because you have teams that have flashed incredibly. Baylor at times has looked like a national championship team. Tennessee at times has looked like one of the best teams in the nation. Virginia looked like one of the best teams in the nation in November and December. How do you stack up that next tier? And is there somebody in that group, maybe it's Kansas State, maybe it's Iowa State, is there somebody in that next group that won't get a 1 seed or be in consideration, but when the NCAA tournament is here, is playing at that level where they're a legitimate Final Four national championship contender or favorite?
I probably, of the 3 seeds, I'd lean Kansas State. I'm also very intrigued by Marquette in the 4-seed line, going one line further down. With Kansas State, I know they sort of slumped a little bit and kind of hit a rough stretch of the season, but I think earlier this week they kind of got back on track. Sorry, I was blanking my mind on who they beat. Oh, yeah, they beat Baylor in a pretty impressive fashion after getting a win over Iowa State last Saturday, where Marquise Noel just went dumb and was making like ridiculous heat check threes. And I think those last 2 wins were big kind of for them to right the ship a little bit, because they lost 4 of 5 and lost some ground in the Big 12 hunt and everything. But, yeah, I think those 2 games taught us something, because they kind of locked back in on defense. And when you have, a guard on any given night who can go off and hit 6 threes and win a game himself, plus Keontae Johnson, who's a legitimate All-American candidate, that's enough to make a run between those 2. Not to mention they just kind of play cohesively as a team, play good defense, and I think you have guys like Cam Carter, Desi Sills, who have also had moments this year who are like pretty quality role players.
Connor, is there anybody in that mix for you that could be dangerous?
Probably Baylor. And look, I understand that the defense has not come around since Chamo Chachua came back, but they still have a coach that has won it within the last 3 years. They still have players on that team that were on the team that won it 2 years ago. And they have a star in Keontae George when he's on, when he gets involved. I'm all the way out on Iowa State again. They're 4-8.
Sorry, Riley.
My Cyclones. Yeah, man, I'm out on them too.
They're 4-8 down the stretch. I was surprised that they were seeded as high as they were, but they've dropped the 2 games they've played since the seeding came out. And down the stretch of the season, they've got Oklahoma and West Virginia at home. That West Virginia game's not going to be a cakewalk. And then they've got Baylor on the road. They're the team, flipping the question, Brian, they're the team I'm least confident about getting out of the first round of any of these teams in the top 16. They're the one I'm least confident about not getting upset. And it's just because they've looked so bad. And while Purdue has also looked bad, it's been over a shorter stretch of the season. And I think Purdue has the ability to win on both ends of the floor if they need to. Iowa State, if they aren't hitting their shots, I just don't see them beating. I'm assuming they're a 4 or 5 seed at this point, but if they're a 4 seed and they're not hitting their shots against a 13 team, like that's the game I'm picking for them as that first round upset, especially if they're they're facing a team like a WAC team or even VCU out of the A10, where VCU hasn't played well, but we know they have talent. Say Oral Roberts drops a game down the stretch of the Summit League and then wins their conference tournament and ends up as a 13 seed. Like, those are games that I'm looking at where they could legitimately beat Iowa State. Of those 5 teams that you named, I'm probably going to go with Kansas State outside of Baylor as being the next team in line. Tennessee, I'm not picking them to lose in the first round, probably not picking them to lose in the first weekend. I know, Rick Barnes, but they're good. They're solid. That floor is high. The ceiling's just pretty low. And Virginia, I'm not sold on them. I haven't been all season. And so they're probably they're definitely a second round team. I'm probably picking them to lose that second round game depending on the matchup. But the Big 12 teams outside of Iowa State, I think, can do some damage in March.
All right, I got to push back a little bit for my clones.
No,
Clone slander's going too far. I think that, like, because of their defense, that's going to give them a safe floor to avoid an upset at the hands of like a 13 seed, unless it's just a team that's going to go dumb from 3. Because, I mean, you saw it last year where they made the Sweet 16 despite having no offensive firepower. I know they had Tyrese Hunter catch fire that one game against Wisconsin, but it
is important to remember Iowa State's path last year, and that not all Sweet 16s were created equal. They faced LSU in the first round, who had just fired Will Wade.
Gosh.
And then
why does that feel like it was 5 years ago that Will Wade got fired?
Because he probably should have gotten fired 5 years ago. And in the second game, I forget who they played in the second game.
Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah, so a brick fest where it didn't matter that they couldn't score.
Dang, okay, I just pulled it up.
Like that matters. That matters. And that matters for Miami making the Elite Eight too, because Miami had Iowa State in the Sweet 16, right? So both those teams come into this year with we had great seasons last year, and they did. Excellent finishes, but there's context to those where maybe they overachieved last year due to some extracurricular factors, and they weren't Elite Eight or Sweet 16 good.
All right, get this about Iowa State. Get this about Iowa State against Wisconsin. Iowa State, in their they won 54-49, averaged 0.78 points per possession. Wisconsin averaged 0.71 points per possession that game.
High quality basketball.
Brickfest.
High quality basketball.
And they are predictably 0-7 when they fail to score 62 in a game. They've done that 5 times over the last 11 games. They've lost games in which their opponents have scored 62 points, 61 points, 64, and 61. So their defense can hold you to under 65, and they can still lose. And that's why I'm not picking them to go deep in the tournament.
Yeah. Virginia is that team for me. Virginia is that team for me because they're like that, but worse almost. I have a piece on Virginia that's coming out on heatcheckcbb.com, part of the latest Ralph report that'll be up. Virginia's offense the last month, 235th nationally in offense. 235th. The last 3 games Virginia's played, a loss to Notre Dame, very narrow win against Louisville, very narrow win against Boston College. Narrow against Notre Dame, and then they beat Boston College, or lost to Boston College. I might be getting those confused there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
almost Notre Dame had a chance at the buzzer to win. They got the 3-point attempt off an offensive rebound that just rimmed out.
Thank you. Yeah. So 3 of the 4 worst teams in the ACC almost beat Virginia recently, right?
Hey, and the last.
It's
the
not
fourth
good.
worst team in the AC. The 4th worst team in the ACC, UNC, is about to beat them on Saturday. So,
I hope so for UNC's sake. we'll get to UNC in the bubble here in a second, but Virginia, to me, yes, they traditionally don't play great offense under Tony Bennett, but the defense is typically awesome. The defense is not a top 30 defense this year, according to Torvik. If they're winning offense that's struggling as bad as theirs is, they're not winning games. They're not playing well. Their overall
They're not shooting well.
Not shooting well either. Their overall T rank for the last month, I'll go in February, is outside the top 100 in the country. They're behind St. Thomas in the Summit League, who joined D1 like 2 years ago. They're not playing well. It may not reflect in their final record because the ACC is down this year. Like, they don't have to play great or good to win a majority of their ACC games. That's just kind of where the ACC is this year. But when you get to your bracket, if Virginia's sitting there on the 3 line, they get a 14 seed in Eastern Washington who hasn't lost since early December and has the size to hang with Virginia. Like, Virginia to me is a team where it's almost, at this point, there's still a couple weeks left. At this point, it's almost an automatic upset pick for me because that's how bad they're playing. But I know I asked the flip side about who is dangerous.
I think with Virginia too, for me, it's Virginia shot over the course of the season 36.5%. They've shot 35.5% over the course of ACC play. Over the last 8 games, they failed to eclipse 33% or 33.3%. They've failed to make over a third of their 3-point shots in 7 of the last 8 games. There is some confidence that they regress slightly to mean, which is still better than Iowa State's mean ever was. They're shooting like 33.5% on the season or something like that. So Iowa State's regression isn't that good anyways offensively. At least Virginia has shown the ability to get into a 3-point shooting contest and win or make the threes. That's just not something that I see from Iowa State. And Virginia, for all of their struggles, has still won a majority. They've only lost 4 games.
Yeah.
Iowa State has lost 4 games in the last 3 weeks. So
I think if you give Virginia Iowa State's schedule and a Big 12 schedule, though, it's a little bit different than Boston College, Notre Dame, and a 4-win Louisville. Because don't forget, Louisville has 4 wins on the season. One of them was over the team that we thought was going to be winning the ACC this year in Clemson, who has fallen off, and they're now a bubble team. We'll make this transition now to the bubble because the ACC has quality teams there, or teams we thought were quality at one point in this season. Clemson and UNC. We'll just jump into the heels now because they're in danger of being the first preseason number 1 team to miss the tournament since the tournament expanded to 64 teams back in 1985. I watched this team, Riley, and they are uninspired, and they're all the things we talked about this season about the lack of ball movement, the different offense, Caleb Love being inefficient. But outside of Caleb Love, RJ Davis, and Armando Bacot, it seems like everybody is scared to do anything. Nobody's effective. Nobody's consistent. And it just adds to the list of issues with this team to where even if they beat Virginia, right, and get on the right side of the bubble, beat Duke, I have a hard time believing this team is going to be able to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you, Brian. I think if they do win out, if they get this win against Virginia on Saturday, which I actually think they will, I don't know about, it would not surprise me if they win at Virginia, then go to Tallahassee and lose at Florida State, just because that's how the season's going. But if they are to sneak into the tournament as like an 11 seed or something, I'm going to be really tempted to pick them to the Sweet 16, similar to like what Michigan did last year. But that's going to be picking with my heart because there is nothing that my eyes have seen this year that says they can win 1 tournament game, much less 2. I think you hit the nail on the head where it's like the uninspired part's not even the most notable detail. I feel like the effort can be up and down. There are times where they do look really locked in. It's just the execution's been awful, where it does come primarily down to ball movement. That ball is not popping. It's like there is hesitation to even get Armando an entry pass when he's working so hard to get positioning, and it's like you hesitate for a second, the help defender comes over and it's gone. And I think Caleb Love has taken a lot of flack. I actually think he's been pretty good over the last month. He's really he's locked in more defensively. He's had some really solid defensive games, which he even told me after the Clemson game when UNC won by 20 that he had talked with assistant coach Jeff Lebo and admitted basically that there are times where he relaxed and took a deep breath when playing off-ball defense. Those were his exact words, and he was trying to lock in more. So shot selection's gotten better. He still has some moments where it gets a little out of pocket, but one of the biggest struggles has been RJ Davis's inefficiency has tanked since the Syracuse game, which was about 3 weeks ago. And he had a finger injury there, dislocated his finger, and I want to say he's shooting maybe 30% or it might even be 28, 29% from three in the 5 games since that Syracuse loss. And considering, Caleb Love has been a pretty erratic 3-point shooter throughout his career, and RJ sort of been the steady one between the two of them, especially last year. And when you have Caleb who can be hit or miss from there, Pete Nance who's been in a horrific shooting slump following his back injury, you don't have RJ giving that consistent offense. It's no wonder that it's just not been a fun team to watch. It just hasn't.
30% would still be better than the team's average on the season. So
That's the problem.
Yeah,
that's a problem.
Below 30% from three this year.
But I want UNC in Dayton. I'm going to say it because if they lose in Dayton, okay, they lost. Despite my Twitter banner, nobody really cares about the first 4 games other than me and Sean Paul. And so
you have to pick first 4 games. If you're filling out a bracket, pick your first 4 games. Tournament games. Sorry.
So UNC could lose that game in Dayton to, I don't know, pick your
Oklahoma State.
Kentucky.
Let's say they lose to Memphis or USC in Dayton, right?
They're not using they won't lose to USC. They would lose to Memphis. They lose to Oklahoma State. They would score 45 points against Oklahoma State. USC, but I'm confident. If we get USC in the first 4, we're going first 4 to Final 4. I'm just going to put that out there. But we can. Anyway, Connor, continue.
So, or West Virginia. Say West Virginia's in that first 4 against UNC, and UNC loses to West Virginia. No sweat, right? They probably didn't even deserve to be there, arguably, but they got put in. Name value, people will point to that. They lost, whatever. Or they could go on a run, right? There's not many teams. You put New Mexico, say they turn their season around. You put them in the first 4. They could lose, or they could probably win 1 game and then lose. There's no chance New Mexico goes on a run. There's no chance Clemson goes on a run. There's no chance that Mississippi State or Wisconsin goes on a run. UNC has a legitimate chance to just flip that switch and go on a run. And if they lose, no big deal, because those first 4 teams aren't going to win the championship anyways. So I want UNC in the tournament. I don't care if it takes their name brand being the reason that they get in. I would much rather see the Tar Heels in the first 4 than any of the other teams on the bubble, with the exception of teams like Oklahoma. I'd rather see them than Oklahoma State. I'd rather see West Virginia in than UNC, and I'd probably rather see Boise State in than UNC, but any of the other bubble teams, I'd much rather see UNC make it over them.
If UNC does what they're supposed to do down the stretch. Because
which is what at this point? What are they supposed to do? What they're supposed to do right now is lose.
if they go 1 and 2 and then lose in the first round of the
KenPom gives them a 58% chance against both Virginia and Duke.
Let's say they lose both those games. Let's lose both those games and then lose in the first round of the ACC tournament to a Clemson or to a Virginia Tech again. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
still
want
them
that.
in. They wouldn't make it.
I don't want
but
that.
I still
to-
want them in.
If they do that, but beat Virginia or beat Duke, then there's some hope I can cling to. Of like, well, they did just do this, so maybe.
Right.
You know, like I need
they're gonna do
them to show me some signs of life, just something. I said
win
before
out
the
the
season that I
season.
thought they would be a historic team, and they've
You were
been
right.
historic.
They're about to be historic. Oh my gosh. I want to get, can we just, I wish I had a time machine where we could just go back to like October where you were saying that and I was so excited for the season. I was so naive. Such fun times.
I completely underestimated how much Brady Manick meant to apparently everything they did offensively.
That's what, I mean, we don't have to spend that much more time on
No,
UNC,
what we
but
did
it really
was
does.
we
puts my brain in a
overestimated
pretzel,
how
man.
much of an issue. We overestimated how much of an issue Dawson Garcia actually was.
And there's no one to like kick
At the
off
time,
team
he
and
seemed
have
like a
them-
real issue. And he has sunk Minnesota, and there's Marquette winning
Well-
a Big East title. So
Well, is there really sinking Minnesota, considering what they've done over the last few years?
okay, he didn't.
They
he
were
didn't raise
feisty
Minnesota.
last year.
He didn't raise
Minnesota was at least, they won more than 7 games last year. And that's what they're at now, 7-win team. But that is what has confounded me the most as a Carolina fan. I was actually talking to my mom today. I doubt my mom will listen to this, but I love you, Mom. She is a ride or die Carolina fan with me. And we were just talking about how it makes no sense that like all you lost was Brady Manick. That shouldn't mean that the team doesn't look like they know how to play with each other anymore. Like, I just don't know what happened to the chemistry that led to that ball move, the ball moving and
the shooting,
making plays for each other.
shooting, spacing. I agree. It should not have led to the fact there's no movement in the offense anymore, and they're not running the same things they did last year. That's on coaching. I don't know.
I agree with you.
There are plenty of other teams, power conference teams, that are in this bubble conversation. We've talked about a couple of Big 12 teams with Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, West Virginia. I'm of the mindset that 2 of those get in. I do not think all 3 can, Connor, but I think the Big 12 can get 2 of those bubble teams in. To me, I think we're looking at Oklahoma State and West Virginia because I don't trust Texas Tech to do that, but Texas Tech might be the hottest of those. How do you see those 3?
I want to say Oklahoma State and West Virginia. West Virginia has 2 road games against Kansas and Iowa State and a home game against Kansas State left. So it's going to be tough sledding to get the wins. Texas Tech has the home game against TCU, throw out that away game against Kansas, and then they play Oklahoma State. And then Oklahoma State has 2 home games, and then they play at Texas Tech, right? Their schedules, I'm not going to call them easy because they're still playing Kansas State, Baylor, and Texas Tech. They're still playing, I think all 3 of them play Baylor or Kansas down the stretch. But 2 of them have 2 home games. West Virginia arguably they have the 2 road games and then probably the toughest, well, maybe the second toughest home game. So I want West Virginia in over the other 2. But they've lost 3 of the last 4. They did beat Oklahoma State. I'm going to say
You just
West
want the
Virginia
chaos
and
of
Texas.
Eric Stevenson being in the NCAA tournament.
I want to yes. I'm going to say West Virginia. I'm going to say Oklahoma State and Texas Tech get in over West Virginia. As much as I don't want Texas Tech to get in because I don't understand their season, but
I mean, Fardaws has been putting up numbers. Jalen Tyson's been coming on strong. Like, I didn't want Texas Tech in either because I'm like, you shouldn't be able to lose, what was it, 8 conference games in a row and be 7-11 in their conference if that's what they do.
They have 3 wins against teams that are safely in the field. 3. Iowa State, Kansas State, and Texas, because West Virginia's not safe and Oklahoma's not in the field.
Yeah. And with that,
lost Connor.
Gone.
Yes.
But,
Having to defend Mark Adams made him so angry that he just disappeared.
For those not watching, Connor just dropped off. Must have had some internet issues. He'll be back up. But Riley, before we jump off these three, who's most dangerous to you of them? Should they get in? Which one do you have the most confidence in winning a game or two?
I mean, yeah, it goes everything against I just said, because I'm like, I maybe it's just because I'm cheering for a bubble team right now, and I'm like, why am I having to worry about Texas Tech taking UNC spot now too? Because they just decided to start playing basketball. But when you look at what Texas Tech does, where they have the defensive identity with Mark Adams, they have someone who has been a March hero before in Kevin O'Banner. They have Jalen Tyson, who has like high 4-star pedigree, and Fardaz Imac, who was a pretty sought after transfer, who got a big NIL package and had a ton of NIL offers to go to whatever power conference school he wanted. I mean, you can combine all that, and I think that's a lot more dangerous than like Trey Mitchell and Emmett Matthews at WVU and Bryce Thompson maybe getting hot for Oklahoma State. Because I think that's kind of the Cowboys. Their only hope would be a crazy Bryce Thompson game to make a little run, or I don't know, maybe Musa Cisse has his like 8 or 9 block performance or something, and they win like a 44-40 game. But I think that does make Texas Tech the most dangerous.
Yeah, I think I'm with you in the fact that Texas Tech is only in this position because of how well they've been playing recently. Mm-hmm. And that does not matter when you're picking tournament teams, right? They've taken out like your last 10 performance. That used to be a metric they looked at. But in terms of dangerous, like there's no doubt that Texas Tech is playing its best basketball right now. They have the furthest, I think, hill to climb to get in. But if Texas Tech were to get in, that's a team where it's like, okay, what's the matchup? Because maybe. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
And I think what's been most impressive about them, like even their 2 wins against Kansas State and Texas, both were pretty decisive. I think that Texas game in particular, they were ahead. I don't know if they were ahead the whole game, but they were ahead essentially wire to wire, maybe from like halfway through the first half through the end of the game.
We'll look at some other power conference teams now before we go to some of the non-power conference teams that are sitting here on the bubble. We've got a couple SEC teams, Mississippi State and Missouri, sitting right there. We've talked about USC and Wisconsin as well. Those 4, to me, Connor, all operate in the same sphere of they're okay. I don't trust them to do anything, but the floor has been high enough to where, you know, like they make the tournament. It's like, yeah, that's okay. Like, to me, if that was the first 4, Wisconsin against Mississippi State, Missouri against USC, that would feel right. That would feel right to me. But I don't know if I have any confidence in any of those teams. Do you have any confidence in any of those teams?
I don't know if I would say I have any confidence in any of those teams. I think that if Missouri ends up in the first 4, they have a legitimate gripe. They have a much better resume than the other 3. When you're talking about the bubble is weak, I don't know if I would include, at least from a resume standpoint, Missouri in that conversation. Look, are they going anywhere? No. But they have the road win over Tennessee. They beat Mississippi State. They beat Iowa State. They have the win over Arkansas. They have the win over Kentucky, Illinois. They're a team that I think as long as they don't lose to Georgia or LSU or Mississippi down the stretch, they should feel relatively safe. Like they shouldn't be viewed as a bubble team. Put them on the 9-10 line because I like their resume a lot more than all the other bubble teams. What were the other 3 you talked about? Wisconsin,
Mississippi State, and USC.
Mississippi State, keep them in. I think. I mean, they have. Again, they beat Missouri. They have a win over Arkansas, a win over TCU. That's basically their resume, but they have 2 bad losses and a couple of good wins. That's better than a lot of the bubble. And USC is the one that I think is the most underwhelming, right? You've got the win over UCLA. You've got the win over Auburn. UCLA, obviously, great win. Auburn's
creeping closer to that bubble.
Auburn, I have no idea how Auburn is still so highly ranked on pretty much every metric.
Makes no sense.
But they are 9-6, so they're not going to have the losing record I projected that they would have, because they did get the win against Missouri. They did get the win against Mississippi. But of those 4, if those 4 were the first 4, Missouri is coming out. I picked them to come out regardless of who they face. And then I'd probably go USC, just because I think the ceiling for USC is higher than the other 2. I don't want anything to do with Wisconsin. And Mississippi State, to me, is just one of those kind of ho-hum, I don't really know what to make of them teams.
They're here.
You know what?
Mississippi State's here because they played a soft non-conference schedule and it inflated their record.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're here. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
You know what could be the Brickfest path to a Sweet 16, though, would be if Mississippi State could get like 2 Brickfests in a row if it's them versus Wisconsin in the first 4, which I'm just going to say this, going back to the Carolina X factor in the committee, there's no way that if it's between like Carolina, Wisconsin, and Mississippi State, that like that Carolina's not getting into that situation just for like money and for eyeballs on the game, because
you cannot sell Mississippi State, Wisconsin first to 40 wins.
But imagine, what if, let's say Mississippi State's at 11 seed, then they get 6 seed San Diego State. That might be another first to 40 wins. That could be your Brickfest.
San Diego State will put 80 on you. They've
sure
shown that. Did you know? So during my Virginia research, in the month of February, you know who's number 1 in Torvik?
Is it San Diego State?
San Diego State.
I mean, I know your love for San Diego State. I should have known it would reemerge, but I just can't. I can't get that
coming back.
That image the day after Valentine's Day, the day after we celebrate love. San Diego State decides to go out on the court and win a 45-43 game against Fresno State, and you're telling me that they're going to be the ones dropping 80 on you?
On Mississippi, not on Mississippi State, not on anybody, but on Mississippi State. Yes.
I don't know about that. Mississippi State defense is pretty good. Mississippi State, though, I do want to point out, shoots 29% from 3, which is
the same as UNC.
Lowest. I think it's even worse than UNC. I think it's like 0.8 difference.
Yeah, I mean, you get to that. This is my thing when we have the conversation that we're inevitably going to have in the late hours of Sunday into Monday and Tuesday after Selection Sunday about who should have gotten in, the teams that got snubbed. If you have to campaign to be the 68th best team in the country and you are left out, you have no room to complain. We're deciding a national champion here. We're picking a national champion. If you have a complaint about whether you're 68th or 69th and you had a chance and things didn't break your way, you did not handle your business enough to have a legitimate gripe, to have the chance to compete for a national championship. So, like, we're talking about teams that are very meh. And I know those fan bases are going to be very upset if they don't make the tournament, because making the tournament is a big deal, and it should be. That's a big deal in our sport. But I think what gets lost in that conversation is that this is a championship deciding tournament, a national champion. If you are mad because you finished in 10th in the SEC and you weren't included in this thing, I'm sorry. Try again next year. You can write all the angry letters you want to, Buzz Williams, but it's you don't have a legitimate case. As we talk about these teams, they're all so meh. They're all so meh.
There's one team that I could see getting left out that I think would have a legitimate gripe. What happens if FAU wins out and then loses in their conference championship to like a North Texas.
I think FAU still.
Do you think they're still in? You think so?
I think they're still in. Yeah. The committee recently has shown a propensity to include those teams. Remember the Drake team from, I think it was 2 years ago, where they got off to that really hot start, had some injuries, kind of stumbled, did not win the Missouri Valley, but got put in. I think they got put in the first four.
Because Missouri Valley, I believe, they had two teams that year. Was that before or after Wichita State left? Yeah,
that was the year Yesufu went off. It was Loyola Chicago was still there, and Crutwig
it was the COVID season
doing work.
The bubble season.
Yeah, so they've done that. They almost gave an at-large to UNC Greensboro a couple years ago. To me, they want to include those teams, and FAU. There's a different conversation with FAU and Charleston because Charleston's probably gotten more national notoriety, but their metrics and resume aren't as good as FAU's. So, if FAU loses to another potential at-large team like North Texas, who has metrics of an at-large team, it's not going to hurt them the same way Charleston losing to suffering a quad 3 loss to a Ken Palm 170 team would, because FAU has metrics carry them that a team like Charleston and other mid majors don't. I think the first four would be like a safety net for them in that case, in a worst case scenario. But to me, as long as they handle their business up until conference tournament time, a team like FAU is fine.
I mean, what if it's not North Texas? What if it's UAB or Middle Tennessee in that championship game? Then
I think UAB is high enough. I think it gets a little hairy if they lose in the regular season again, and then lose in the first round or second round, because you make you will have won enough games to get to the conference tournament championship game, and no one's going to knock you for losing to UAB, even though UAB has not been as good as we thought this year, right? You play a championship game, and suddenly, if they want you in, well, that's a loss to a tournament team. Whether or not that team would have been in the tournament without that conference championship victory, that's a lot. That's a loss to a tournament team. Well, that's fine. We'll put you in there. The committee will pull certain things that they need to. But we'll see. It's going to make that particularly Conference USA tournament and the CAA tournament with Charleston very interesting. A couple of teams that are on that level, that non-power conference level, that are in this mix here. Memphis, in particular, because Penny Hardaway always seems to find a way here. He's the new Jim Boeheim in that regard. And then you got a handful of Mountain West teams that are sitting here on the bubble. Boise State, Nevada, Utah State, all in the mix. I'd like to see those teams be benefited out over teams like Wisconsin, Mississippi State. Connor, is there any of those, the Memphis, Boise State, Utah State, Nevada, anybody in that group that you think can do some damage if they do end up on the right side on Selection Sunday?
I'm always going to give credit to the athleticism that Memphis has, especially now that they have arguably still a top 3 point guard in the country, Kendrick Davis. Yeah. And I'm still not entirely out on Boise State being a second weekend threat. Okay. So those would be the two teams. I know Boise State's shooting has dipped since we did that draft. I wouldn't want Utah State in over Boise State, even though Utah State shoots unbelievably well. I just don't see them having the defense to stop another team in that first game. And then what was the last one?
Utah
Memphis,
State,
Boise
Nevada.
I think Nevada and Boise State. I think Nevada's a really good team. They should be in. They're hot. They have some of the best. I think they're first. Are they still first in the Mountain West? Second in the Mountain West? Third in the Mountain West?
I think they're second. They're in the conversation for
Boise
second.
State's second.
State's still first.
Yeah. Yeah. So those would be I think those two Mountain West teams should get it. I think the Mountain West is really good. So they should get 2 or 3 teams in. And none of Nevada's losses are terrible.
Right.
The worst, well, UNLV on the road, and then LMU on the road. But remember, this is an LMU team that has beat two 5 seeds or better so far this season. At least.
Who are those teams?
St. Mary's and Gonzaga.
I had to make sure we hit our Gonzaga quota for the episode. Make sure we mention Gonzaga at least once. Riley, those 4, I'll just same question to you. Anybody who scares you if you're an opponent who sees them come up next to you on Selection Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, Nevada, I think, has got to be a little bit scary just because they combine. I mean, they're a top 40 offense, top 40 defense. And I think someone like Keenan Blackshear, who has seemed like he's definitely had a bit of a breakout year and has the size at 6'6" as a point guard to give some teams some fits that way. Will Baker, who's another guy who had some pedigree and was a 5-star recruit at one point. I think those are some of the teams that you look at when they are playing pretty well on both sides of the ball, and you have 2 guys who could conceivably either cause issues with their size or, like someone with Will Baker, who at least at one point in his career was a high major player. Theoretically, you think those guys might fare a little bit better if they're going up against power conference opponents.
I'm going to put on my Sean Paul hat for a second. If Illinois is the 6 and they catch Memphis as an 11, I'm sharpieing Memphis in 11 times out of 10 to win that game.
Memphis is that team to me that, like, if anybody is going to go first 4 to second weekend, it's Memphis. The defense they play is a pain to plan for and a pain to play against. You throw in a Kendrick Davis, and now he's got some injury stuff he's dealing with, but assuming a healthy Kendrick Davis come that time, they're going to have the best player on the court at the most meaningful position. Like, that's a dangerous combo that wins in March when other reasoning is thrown out the window. They just have a guy who can do things, and they play a way that makes you uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Right?
The only thing with Memphis, though, wasn't it said today Keontae Kennedy's out for the rest of the year?
Yes.
Or am I messing that up? So they're going to be relying on a lot of Elijah McCadden, a lot of Jaden Hardaway in his stead.
Yes.
Maybe Demaria Franklin steps up. But
they're going to rely on Kendrick Davis to score 30. But we have said for how long now that this is a tournament where it's a great time for a Kemba candidate to step up. Kendrick Davis is as good of a candidate to be that guy as anybody. You know? So we'll see how that plays out. And we'll be back with you next week as we're talking conference tournaments. They start Monday with the A-Sun tournament, and then we have 2 weeks of March Madness bliss before Selection Sunday comes. The primers. We're all getting ready here at HeatCheck CBB. Make sure you check that out. Follow us over there. Follow us on Twitter. Check us out on YouTube. Make sure at the Hangout CBB, we're going to have this covered from all angles, called conference tournaments, obviously the NCAA tournament. We consider ourselves, diehard college basketball fans. That's why we write about this, and we write about stuff and cover this. Things that we would want to know about, more about. If you're a college basketball fan, make sure you're checking out heatcheckcbb.com. Again, we'll be back with you next week as we start previewing the conference tournaments and the conference tournament championship games. It's all coming up. It's the best time of year, guys. But when we meet again, I think we'll be in March. It'll be a good time. Thank you guys for listening.
Conference tournaments will have already started because the A-Sun starts early next week.
Starts Monday. And then we got the stretch from next Saturday, the OVC tournament championship game, through the following Sunday, where we got 32 bids to be handed out in 8 days. It's a lot of fun.
Who are we cheering for in the ASUN tournament? Real quick, give me your rooting interests. Kennesaw State Owls. First tournament appearance, program history.
I'm probably rooting for Kennesaw State because I don't root for Liberty. But I picked Liberty, and I think it'd be a lot of fun to see Darius McGee in an NCAA tournament situation. But I'll root for Kennesaw State.
I get the sentiment. I do think Richie McKay seems like a likable fellow, even though
I think so too.
There's a lot of things within Liberty that rub me the wrong way. But
I'm rooting for Stetson.
Go Hatters.
Hatters.
Because I want somebody, even if they lose, I want someone who can at least put up points against whatever team's going to blow them out by 20. So, and if they put up points, maybe it's...
They have a win over Florida State this year.
I
They
know.
can play power conference competition.
They were looking like the best team in
have
Florida.
wins
for a
over
little
Florida
bit.
State this year, Brian.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. But you'd rather have that than not. So for co-host Connor Hope and Riley Davis, I'm Brian Ralph. Thank you guys very much for watching or listening. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.